Welcome back. Last video we saw the climax kick into motion through a series of events that really turned the whole series on its head. Rosemine obtaining her own book of Mestianora, growing up over winter with the intervention of the gods, and then getting a vision of Ferdinand being assassinated in Arensbach. So she's launching a rescue mission while Georgine makes her move on Ehrenfest Foundation. And then in the background of all of that, we caught a glimpse of Raublu conspiring with the Lanzenhof King and Det Lin to invade the Royal Academy. Yeah, things just got crazy. In this volume, we're going to see the first phase of the main conflict this series has been building to over its entire run. But before we go ahead and get into all that, why not hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on Bookworm content from me? And hey, here's my obligatory merch plug, because putting that in each video feeds the capitalism monster. With those finally out of the way, let's go ahead and get into Part 5, Volume 8. Our prologue begins from Eustace's perspective, right after their frustrating but mostly peaceful life in Arensbach came to an abrupt end. Letizia hands Eustace the cage with their namestones right after rushing out of the Ob's office, and his brain basically shuts down for a moment. The implications of what happened are just too much to process. But Eckhart doesn't have that same problem, since he put 2 and 2 together and immediately lashes out at Letizia. That's enough to bring Eustace back to Earth, as he reminds Eckhart what their lord ordered them to do, and they book it down the hall before he does something drastic, with Stroll and Sergius giving chase, of course. However, Eustace spent his days in Arensbach learning the servant passages, so they quickly lose their pursuers by ducking down one of those. No one's around, so Eustace pulls his name out of the cage and undoes the name swearing with a heavy heart. That shocks Eckhart because, as we know, name swearing is an act of absolute loyalty, and dying with their lord would have been the correct choice here. In fact, Eustace doesn't even have an issue with that, but that would mean he didn't enact his lord's orders before dying with him, which is a failure on his part, and he tells Eckhart just as much, that he's welcome to die with Ferdinand, but Eustace still has work to do before then, and that makes Eckhart follow suit, with tears in his eyes. Why? Because back when his pregnant wife was killed, the plan was for them to serve Ferdinand with their all. So Eckhart essentially threw himself into his work to keep his wife's memory alive. So this is pretty hard on them both, because while Eustace doesn't have an important promise to keep like Eckhart, he did promise Losfam that he would protect Ferdinand, and clearly he didn't. Are they even going to make it back to Ehrenfest in time to return his namestone? Who knows? But they have orders and a plan to enact. So where to? To the Royal Academy, of course, to deliver a care package to Ehrenfest from Ferdinand containing all the reports and evidence they collected to present to the royal family. So they head to the teleporter where Ferdinand already laid the groundwork for them to get permanent passes to use it from Det Lind. Why? To deliver stuff to Rymoon, but this is the actual reason behind it. In case shit went down, they could escape to the Royal Academy. This was an exchange for him supplying mana before his marriage. Now this move here is a gamble, as the guards could have already been alerted about their actions, but Eustace banked on them having more important things to do than search for them. They would have to contact Det Lind to get permission before a search could even start. And based on the guards' lax attitude when they approach, his gamble paid off. So they brush off the questions from the guards and quickly head to the academy. And once there, they sign a magic letter to Ehrenfest with Sylvester's signature already on it to get them into the tea party room. They're basically chasing after the bird the magic letter turned into, and quickly get let in while the knights watching the teleporter alert Ehrenfest. In the meantime, Eustace prepares the room a bit to get his mind off things. But that lasts about a minute, because as soon as he sits down, he starts plotting his revenge. The thing is, they're not expecting to be let back into Ehrenfest. As soon as they deliver this information, they're going right back to Arensbach and laying traps to kill everyone involved. Yeah, both of them are on the same page, but that's when Sylvester arrives. He clears the room, and before they can even say what happened, he spoils that by saying that Rosemine already told him. That's a shock, since they heard she was missing. But wait, who told them that? Yeah, Hersher, of course, as payment for Ferdinand helping her brew during the tournament. I mean, it could have been a worse leak, so it's more annoying than an actual problem. But that does beg the question, how did Rosemine know this in the first place? Sylvester finally puts a name to the phenomenon we saw. She received Ferdinand's last testament, named such because it's a subconscious broadcast of mana, and usually happens when people are just about to die, so they're rarely saved. That explains it. Though it's shocking that Ferdinand of all people would send one out, because it requires a strong emotional connection. We hear where Georgine's at, that she left for spring prayer and is probably waiting by the border to invade. Well, we the audience already knew that, but now Sylvester knows. But that's when Sylvester drops the massive news that Rosemine is gonna head out to save Ferdinand that night. She has his permission as Ob already, but they're also about to secure the royal families, assuming Ferdinand came through, that is, prompting Eustace to hand over his evidence. Now, that wasn't initially the plan. This was to decry that Lind is incompetent to rule. However, repurposing it here will push them over the line by spinning this as a Lanzanov plot. Though Ferdinand did make it clear to Eustace to convey that Ehrenfest should pretty much do nothing, as whatever he's plotting should solve the issue. Apparently. Yeah, that won't stop Rosemind though, not mid-rampage. But with this news, Eckhart kneels and presses his forehead to the back of Sylvester's hand for saving his lord. Yeah, it's a bit early for that, Eckhart. Either way, the plan is in motion to save Ferdinand, and that's when Sylvester drops 2 registration face stones on the table, which speaks volumes. He had those prepared before even hearing Eustace and Eckhart out, meaning he intended to welcome them back as citizens no matter what. So with that, Sylvester goes to meet with the royal family while Eustace and Eckhart head on back to Rosemind's library. We aren't introduced to much in terms of new information here, but we do get to see the groundwork crap that Rosemind's pretty much oblivious to. That Ferdinand was already going to decry that Lind is incompetent at the Archduke conference, that Sylvester's getting the royals on board, just pretty much how everybody feels about this situation. And what I really like is just how hard this hits Eustace and Eckhart, from the depths of despair to finally giving them some hope. That's a hell of a roller coaster to kick this volume off with. Back to Rosemind's perspective, it's right after she left Sylvester's office and is getting her retainers ready. Hartmut, Cornelius, and Lieseletta are already up to speed, but they're meeting at her chambers first to give proper instructions to the rest of her retainers. And she wastes no time, dropping the news that they're invading Arensbach to steal its foundation tonight, and it's all hands on deck here. She'll divide the work accordingly because Georgine is about to attack Ehrenfest as well. Lieseletta and Gresha are gonna go to the library to prepare with Losfam for Eckhart and Eustace. Ottilie and Bertilda are gonna stay in the castle to get Rosemind ready and send magic tools on over. Hartmut and Clarissa are gonna join this fight, one to manage the magic tools, and Clarissa can actually just hold her own. She's a scholar of the sword after all, so that's not much of a surprise, but the biggest orders do have to go to her knights. Lorenz is underage, so he could stay behind if he wants, but Rosemind has his name, so he's not going to let her go off and be reckless without him to protect her at least, which lights a fire under Judith since she doesn't want to be left behind either. But she's not only underage, but she also still has a family alive, meaning she should probably get her father's permission if she can even join the fight. And based on the running gag here, don't expect her to come. As for her adult guard knights, they're all going. With one exception, of course. She pulls Damiel aside and gives him some special orders with a sound blocker. She wants him to protect her lower city family and associates since he's the only person who can. Georgine's pretty damn sharp, so she could probably put together Rosemind's priorities based on her actions alone. And since Rosemind is still the High Bishop on paper, Georgine might try to take hostages to get Rosemind to clear the way for her. So she leaves protecting them to Damiel while she's away. And he accepts that order without much fuss, because he also promised Ferdinand he would protect her heart, meaning the things closest to her when he left last year. Yeah, it's a pretty touching moment where Damiel accepts his orders by kneeling and wishing her luck, for both hers and Ferdinand's sake, where Rosemind replies that he is her first and best guard knight. So with that, Damiel leaves, and Cornelius asks where he's off to. Rosemind simply replies that he's her guard knight and protecting what is most dear to her. At the library, Losbaum has things ready, of course, and asks Rosemind about Ferdinand's situation. Though Rosemind is confident that they'll save him, she lays out that Eustace and Eckhart are on their way, they have Sylvester's permission, and Dunkelfelger's gonna assist. So they have a hell of a crack team for this rescue mission. She has Losfam get clothes ready for their guests and prepare some for Ferdinand too. And with that, she heads to her chambers to fire off ordinances so she's not in everyone's way. The first one's to Bridget because Ilgner does actually border Arensbach, where she informs her that shit's about to go down in detail. That's when she has her gather as much intelligence from the commoners as possible and share it with the neighboring Giebsen castle. If there's any suspicious activity on the border, send word to the castle and Bonifatius can mobilize the Knights Order there immediately. From the response she gets though, it's pretty clear that Florencia told them all to be ready for an invasion, which is cool, but she didn't actually tell them what the hell this means. So Rosemind sends off an ordinance to Florencia telling her to give more details to the Giebs, or else they're just going to be confused as hell. Also, tell Gieb Gerlach to strengthen his defenses most of all, since Grausum is probably going to lead an attack there. With that, she goes to her hidden room and pulls out her Gruchicite to look for maps of Arnsbach. She needs to see where the temple is in relation to everything, and ends up striking gold. Yeah, the initial blueprints from when the city was created, as well as the temple floor plan. But the only key piece of information she's missing is the castle itself, and those don't usually change unless there's a complete reconstruction, which sucks because that means Ferdinand probably has that part. Well, at least Eustace and Eckhart are coming, and they probably know the layout. No need to go bother Aurelia, right? So with that, she pastes the relevant maps onto some fey paper with her newest spell. When she leaves her hidden room, Judith informs her of the obvious. She didn't get permission, so that means she's staying. That's when Rosemine gives her an extra special mission to help cheer her up. Help out at the temple with her ranged attacks, framing it like she's doing just as much as Damiel is, and that actually motivates her quite a bit. Sucks for her though. Invading another duchy is like the pinnacle of achievement for a knight. Obviously, True Ditter is rarely played, so Judith feels like she's missing out on the most important aspect, invading another duchy and taking their foundation. Fear not though, she does get a chapter next volume detailing her exploits. That's when Eustace and Eckhart arrive, and we see that Eustace is shocked by Rosemine's growth. Eckhart doesn't really care. Because he's so singularly focused on Ferdinand, he just accepts her growth as fact. Yeah, Eckhart is probably closer to Angelica than we'd probably like to admit, but his isn't necessarily due to intellectual laziness, it's mostly because he's just so devoted. So he lists off some preparations, and Rosemine fires back that they've already been done, which earns her some praise from Eckhart, because that's the only time he actually praises her, when she does something for Ferdinand. They remember that Sylvester said she was confident in their success, so can they actually pull this off? Yeah, she can. And with them there, their chances of success just shot even higher. Curiosity finally wins out, and Eustace asks what happened to her to cause her to grow so much. But before she can even explain, Hartmut launches into an impassioned speech so full of purple prose, pretty much everyone just tunes him out. Well, except Eustace, who takes a moment to realize Hartmut's all flair and no substance. So with that, they move on to eat and share what they know. Rosemine's looking to see how Letizia is doing, but Eckhart doesn't know or care. Seems cold considering she's the one who delivered the message, but Eckhart hands her a sound blocker to let her know how he really feels. And to summarize, it's fuck her. But in detail, he explains that if he didn't focus on his mission, he probably would have killed all of her guard knights to interrogate Letizia to find out exactly what happened to lead to this situation. They were the only ones in the mana replenishment hall, so by process of elimination, she's the one who put Ferdinand's life in danger in the first place. Detlind wasn't around. Obviously, they were guarding the door, but that's where their experiences diverge. Rosemine lets him and Eustace know that Detlind stepped into the replenishment hall after she left, and then revealed that she's the one who tricked Letizia into the assassination attempt. That doesn't really change Eckhart's mind, but sure, Letizia clearly didn't take Ferdinand's lessons to heart if she was so easily tricked. However, the fact that he did get some antidote, and then Detlind hit him with a second dose of poison to paralyze him, and then is forcing him to offer mana until he dies is their main concern. Eckhart asks if they can make it in time, but Rosemine's kinda confused here. Why is he asking that when that's pretty much the whole reason they came back, right? Well, no. They only wanted to hand over the evidence, and then go on a rampage killing pretty much everyone involved. Damn, talk about giving up. Eustace switches the topic to how grateful they are that Rosemine is there, especially after her disappearance. Skip the confusion here because that was supposed to be a secret, and then launches into how Detlind left the Interduchy tournament to open the border gate with Bonzanov. Well, Alstida did, but that's a detail not super important right now, or one that Eustace and Eckhart actually know. So is that border gate, like, open right now? Sure shit it is. And Lonzanov has been treating their port like they own it. That does beg the question then, is Arnsbach's country gate closer to the capital than Dunkelfelger's border gate? And turns out it is. Great, meaning they can get there even faster than she expected, because she was gonna have Dunkelfelger create a teleporter to their border gate with Arnsbach. And here's where Eustace explains what Ferdinand gave them, as well as a message for her. He tells her to sit tight, and when he dies, everything of his will belong to her. She knows what Ferdinand's implying by that she'll get his half of the Gruchicite, but she tells Eustace she's not going to accept that order. Obviously, she already promised to save him if he was ever in danger. That's when Eustace slips her a sound blocker and tells her something pretty damn important. Namestones can take a life, as well as extend it, by the owner giving the person mana through it. So Eustace knows Ferdinand gave his to her? Well, yeah, he's the one who made the bag. But can she really steal his name to save his life? Eustace pressures her, and eventually she accepts. After all, she can always just give it back. So in her room, after making the white box it goes in, she takes Ferdinand's name as quickly as possible to avoid the pain, and gives him a single order through it: live, because she's coming to save him. See, that whole Ferdinand namestone thing came back in a big way. After a nap, it's time to meet Sylvester for the big invasion. She loads up her high beast and they fly to the Knights training ground. Weird, why are they heading there when they need to be at the country gate? Well, it turns out that Rosemine found another useful item in her Grutricite, a network of teleporters for troop mobilization throughout Ehrenfest. A magic circle in the training ground connects to every Gieb's estate in the duchy, and it can move a ton more people than just the 3 the one to the Royal Academy can take. So they all pile on and Sylvester chants the spell, where everyone going and the knights powering the circle suddenly find themselves in Kernberger. The Gieb welcomes them and they rush on over to the country gate, where Sylvester opens it with another Archduke spell, and the dormant country gate is sitting on the other side. He asks Rosemine if she can really activate it, and she confirms that she should. In theory. As it turns out, you don't need to have died the Foundation to use the country gates. Hell, Tulkunheit opened one to found Lanzanov, and he wasn't even Zent. So she pulls out her Grutricite, causing a stir because, remember, this is her first time using it in front of other people, and presses it onto the country gate to fill it with mana. Now this does take a ton, but the gate shines once more. The country gate roof then opens up, and inside is another massive teleporter. Yeah, it turns out the Zents of old used to take a ton of people with them when they would go around opening the country gates, so these teleporters are massive. Rosemine and her retainers are gonna pile into her high beast since no one else can enter, but there are stairs so other people can get in without the king's permission. That just takes too much time they don't have. However, before she goes though, Sylvester gives her a symbol to silence any dissenters, a necklace with 6 face stones on it that she interprets as a symbol of authority from the king. We'll see just how mistaken she is in a few chapters. Yeah, when Sylvester went to the academy, he told the king he needed to speak immediately, and he tried to schedule it for a few days out. That was fine, but Sylvester responded that he'd be getting a report after the fact as there was no stopping what was about to go down. So as it turns out, this is actually from Sigiswald, and will prove that she's acting with royal permission. Okay, so Sylvester puts a necklace on her for the 2nd time in this series, but at least she has more practice putting accessories on this go around. This one for sure will give her enough authority to finally protect those close to her now. After all, it's pretty much the highest you could get. And then they're finally able to head off to save Ferdinand. She stands atop the teleporter and chants the magic word to take her and her retainers off to Dunkelfelger, but rather than it being super quiet like the dead of night in Kernberger because, well, it is the dead of night, she's hearing a thunderous noise outside. No way, really? Yeah, Clarissa explains that their knights are outside pumping themselves up. Are they going to be exhausted before they even get there? Hell no. So Rosemine exits to see a huge crowd gathered atop the duchy's border gate on the other side of the country one, 100 knights on one side, and a group of cheering family members seeing them off into battle on the other. And with them is Ob Dunkelfelger, Sieglinde, and Lestalot. Now I guess it makes sense that Hannelore isn't there. She's underage. So Rosemine addresses the Ob's family and everyone around him is stunned. However, that's when Rosemine hears Hannelore's voice from behind her remarking on her growth. And sure enough, when she looks back, Hannelore is present wearing a full suit of face stone armor. Oh, she's actually going on this mission? Yeah, it turns out to redeem herself for her failure during Ditter in the 3rd year, she needs to wipe the shame of that loss away with a victory. Wait, so is it really okay for an underaged female Archduke candidate to charge into battle with another duchy? Pot meat kettle. So Leonore heads off to go brief the knights while Rosemine greets the Ob properly. Lestalot is a bit stiff, knowing she has the Grutricite and fixing how he talks to her, but she urges him to speak like he normally would, and he relents. Dude can't say no to a pretty face, I guess. However, Sieglinde is mostly happy to see that her husband didn't exaggerate the claims. Rosemine showed up with a Grutricite and a symbol of the royal family. Thus her duchy will obey the will of the Zent. So Ob Dunkelfelger is stoked to play true Ditter, but his wife rains on his parade. They'll be staying back in Dunkelfelger with their main force, ready to aid the sovereignty should they request it. Lestalot will just be staying back in general. He's the heir and somebody has to protect the Foundation, while Hannelore is going off to assist Rosemine. Sounds like a plan. Stealing Arnsbach's Foundation won't really be an issue, as the real challenge here is saving Ferdinand. Enter the man, the myth, the legend, Aisitsa to reaffirm that they're gonna save him for sure, since he views it as his fault that Ferdinand is in this position in the first place. He's gonna bust in, find Ferdinand, save his life, then hand him his cape so he can win it back in actual combat, like he was supposed to. You ever think his wife gets jealous? So the knights know what they're doing, and they're all ready to move out. Just one last thing. Dunkelfelger does that ritual before dinner, remember? So would Rosemine do the honors? Not enthusiastically, but all she has to do is pray while they dance. And sure enough, as soon as the spears come out, she notices more than a few Leidenschaft spears among the knights. Good on them. So Rosemine fires off a massive blessing, and Dunkelfelger charges into the tower for the mass teleportation, the logistics of which are pretty much a nightmare. Since there's too many to do in one go, she has to make 2 trips. But the plan is for the first group to wait in the tower, while the second one springs out of the roof to surprise whoever's there. Not that Eckhart is worried, because he knows that there's no knights stationed at the border gate. That's absurd though, right? Well, when they pop out, Eckhart was right. The air is dead silent despite the fact that the country gate is now shining, and a ton of people just crossed the border without the Ob's permission. Aurora doesn't like the look of this, but they proceed with the plan. Aurora and Dunkelfelger will go unleash hell, while Rosemine's crew secures the foundation. And the bad feelings only get worse as things go on. Arnsbach is completely defenseless, even as Dunkelfelger launches their attack and bombs the Nobles' Quarter with magic tools. No signals fire out, and there's no knights swarming. What the hell's going on? Well, I guess it's not really hurting them, so who cares? Rosemine locates the temple and drops down into the courtyard with her retainers, Eckhart and Eustace. Weirdly enough, Arnsbach's temple isn't between their lower city and Nobles' Quarter, but actually in the middle of it. Yeah, turns out their priest just brought the chalices to Ferdinand, rather than him having to go to the temple itself. No sense worrying about that now. She expects to just waltz right in like she already owns the place, but Hartmut stops her. Why? Well, this is still enemy territory, and tactfully dances around the real issue. Other temples aren't like Ehrenfest, so who knows what's happening inside? Probably nothing good. So he's gonna go on ahead with her name sworn to keep the location of the Foundation's entrance a secret, mostly because Hartmut's already figured it out through context clues. They're gonna subdue the High Bishop and wrestle permission to enter the bookroom from him, while Rosemine waits outside. Cool. While Hartmut, Eustace, Lorenz, and Matthias are gone, an ordinance from Clarissa arrives that's saying despite their best efforts, Arnsbach's Knight's Order still hasn't shown up, and Dunkelfelger is now getting restless. She's asking for permission to enter the castle and search for the replenishment hall ahead of her. Wait, did Devlin just straight up take her entire Knight's Order to the Sovereignty? What the hell? At this point, you're probably imagining the worst case scenario after what we learned at the end of last volume. And the fact that the audience can picture that pretty easily is part of the tension and horror that thrives in this series, without it getting gory. Yeah, I'll continue to praise this series for how it creates disgust and suspense without resorting to that. But when Rosemine sends her response, some voices outside the temple gate notice the bird flying off. They call out that there's some mana wielders and they try to break it down by force. Okay, so are the commoners here just pissed off at the nobles or what? Probably not. Angelica jumps up to see who it is and says they're wearing silver cloth. Looks like we got a skirmish on our hands. So she and Eckhart take point, where Angelica opens the gate as they ram into it, and Eckhart swings down behind them to kick them inside. They assume they have the upper hand for all of 2 seconds, when Angelica tries to restrain them with her stop. But then she just straight up stabs one, and that pretty much puts an end to their smug attitude. Eckhart scolds her to use enhancement magic instead, rather than a blade. That way they can reuse these clothes. Since they're mana immune, they can't just clean them with washing, and that's when Eckhart pulls a Bonifatius, by straight up choking this dude out and snapping his neck. Just one left, and after he throws a knife, Angelica knocks it away with her hand, and that activates one of her charms. She then roundhouse kicks the dude out cold and wraps them up in rope. So much for the silver weapons, huh? Yeah, knowing about them makes them that much easier to deal with. With that wrapped up, Matthias returns and asks Rosemine to follow. She's gonna need one more guard for security reasons, and thus Eckhart volunteers since he's formerly, and soon to be name sworn again, good enough, and it keeps the secret safe. So they head out to meet up with Hartmut and Eustace at their destination, where we very briefly see the Arnsbach High Bishop. Don't get too excited, he doesn't get a name or description, so obviously not important. Hartmut explains that there were no traps found in the bookroom since the temple's noble visitors don't actually go there. According to the High Bishop, wow, sounds like Ehrenfest is falling behind, right? Well no, these were for flower offerings. Yeah, consider that topic dropped. So once they find the statue of Mestianora, Rosemine puts in the Bible key to open the door, while Hartmut's standing by with rejuvenation potions. After transversing the fog gate, nope, never mind, I already did that joke last video, she nearly steps on a magic circle and stumbles to catch herself. Yeah, that's an obvious trap, and after throwing a face stone on it, she would have been a well done bookworm. But good thing the trap is spent after that initial blast, and she can get to work dyeing the foundation. She lines up some empty face stones on it to drain it of mana before putting in her own. That'll save her some effort. And we see that the vessel isn't even half full of pale green mana. But from the ceiling, she sees what looks like gold dust trickling down from the replenishment hall. That's Ferdinand offering mana right there, but the rate is way slower than she expected. Mostly because Det Lind was the one who activated the circle, so she should have been setting the flow, meaning this was Ferdinand's last act of defiance. Good on him. So she gets to work after partially draining the foundation and pulls out her stop, slamming as much mana into it as she can. She downs a high quality rejuvenation potion, and that's still not even helping as she's pouring more mana into it than she's recovering. But before long, the color finally starts to change before a massive flash happens, and the foundation is a pale yellow like her mana, meaning Rosemine's done it. She's the new Ob Arnsbach. Wow, that was much easier than expected, but this is only the first part in a multi-phase plan. The hard part's just now beginning. Because while becoming Archduchess seems like a pretty easy fix, Ob Dunkelfelger told her why it wouldn't be at the end of last volume. Back at her High Beast, she gets an update on the situation. Dunkelfelger invaded the castle and found that Lanzanov was running around like they own the place, pillaging magic tools from the western and northern buildings. And that seems to be the story all over the Nobles' Quarter. The kicker? Under Det Lind, Alstida, and Georgine's orders too, with a clear bias in their targets being members of Letizia's faction. That sounds scary, but the inhabitants are nowhere to be seen, most likely hiding in their hidden rooms waiting this out, because that's where they'll be safest, obviously. How's Dunkelfelger faring in this fight? Without a single injury. Yeah, their info about the silver weapons and poison proved pretty useful in the fighting. The Lanzanovians who fled the castle from the fighting are making their way back to the estate, where they're going to be going for their boats, basically taking what they've got so far and heading home. Oh shit. But don't worry, since they don't have high beasts, it's gonna take them a while yet. Rosemine's more worried about Letizia and all this, but they can't really contact her because their methods of doing so would alert Lanzanov to her presence and put her in danger if she's hiding. So thus they focus on Ferdinand's rescue instead. Eustace sends off a bunch of ordnances to alert Ferdinand's retainers that they're coming to the castle, but 3 of them refuse to fly. That's an ominous sign that usually someone is dead. Well, either that or across duchy borders, and based on circumstances here, that last one's unlikely. With that, they head to the castle to link back up with Hannelore. Eustace and Eckhart take her to the Archduke's office, where they find Dunkelfelger's knight standing outside, dealing with some Arnsbach nobles demanding an explanation. These are the nobles Eustace sent ordnances off to, so they're friendly at least. Rosemine thanks Hannelore for her assistance, while she's directing the Arnsbach nobles to address Ehrenfest with their questions rather than asking Dunkelfelger since they were just there for the game. But Rosemine wastes no time in heading in to complete her mission, rescuing Ferdinand, and has Hannelore stand guard outside. But before Rosemine can enter the office, one noble steps forward, realizing that Rosemine actually stole their foundation, and asks her to close the border gate right away to save his daughter who was kidnapped by Lanzanov. Yeah, that's like the lowest on her list of priorities right now. These Arnsbach nobles are mistaken. She wasn't sent by the royals to come rule their duchy, she's just here to save Ferdinand. If Arnsbach and their knights want revenge, they're free to go fight Lanzanov for all she cares. And with that, she has the noble removed from the Ob's office because he no longer has a blood connection to the current Archduchess. You probably wouldn't care about some random dude's daughter until you notice the context clues that it's Faerzila, which means wherever Strahl's daughter is, that's where Letizia is too. With the room cleared of annoyances, Eustace points out the entrance to Rosemine having learned the location from Strahl, the guy she just kicked out a second ago. But a thought does occur. How can they get Ferdinand out? She was just gonna drag him out using enhancement magic, so Eustace could administer the potions they brought because there's a ton of them and they need to be given in a specific order. But his registration face stone is gone, meaning he can't actually leave the replenishment hall. That's a problem. But for now, Eustace gives her the potions and a run through on the process on how to save his life first. And just when she has that down, Hartmut stops her to suggest that she cleanse the room with a wash end first. She nearly died of a non-fatal dose of poison in part 3, and there's likely still residuals of a lethal poison on Ferdinand and the room itself. So she sticks her arm in and power washes the room before finally heading inside. And it's not great. Ferdinand is lying motionless on the ground, So she races over and runs through the list of potions to shove down his throat, starting with a Jareve to break up the mana clumps that might have formed. You'd think they wouldn't have time for him to slip into a coma right now to recover, but based on how Jareves act from this volume onward, I think it's safe to say they only do that when you're on death's door. And Ferdinand did get an antidote on time. And that's all on top of his natural resistance to poison due to his frequent exposure. From there, she throws in some healing for good measure, before giving him the paralyzing poison antidote. With that, he does seem to be breathing easier, and actually able to move around somewhat. But she does still give him a taste of his own medicine, quite literally, with the ultra nasty rejuvenation potion. What, you thought Ferdinand was used to that flavor? You'd be wrong, because he starts coughing violently. Rosemine thinks she screwed something up, but Ferdinand turns the tables on her and pins her to the ground with the handcuff chain at her throat, actually starting to strangle her and leave a bruise. That's terrifying, and he demands to know who she is. Great, he's broken. Or not, he just doesn't recognize Rosemine due to her growth. After some debate about how tall he remembers her being, he accepts that it is Rosemine and lets her up. So why did he choke somebody giving him an antidote? Simple, he thought that nastiness was just more poison. Yeah, I believe it. But why was he so violent? I don't know. Probably because some idiot stole his name and ordered him to live no matter what. So he acted on any threats with extreme prejudice. So with that, she gets him up and feeds him the rest of his medicine while trying to figure out exactly how to remove these handcuffs. Yeah, there's no keyhole, so what's she gonna do? Ferdinand calls her a fool because she has a source of near limitless information at her fingertips, quite literally. So check her damn Grutricite. And that makes sense. So she whips it out and finds the schematics inside. There she shows Ferdinand while he's wondering what the hell is wrong with her book of Mestianora. What do you mean? It's pretty convenient, right? It glows in the dark and you can search for whatever you want. Well, talk about a waste. Because Ferdinand points out that the book should show you whatever you want when you open it. Oh, never mind. Hers is just a more cumbersome solution to a problem that was already fixed. Great. So here's a question for you. Does the book do that by default, or is that just how Ferdinand envisioned it working? Hard to tell. We're gonna need a bigger sample size for a more clear-cut answer. While they have this debate though, Ferdinand notes that Rosemine's got a big dumb grin on her face. And sure enough she does. Probably because she's happy that he's okay. Honestly, this was pretty damn stressful because who knew if when they found him, he would have been permanently injured or a vegetable. All very real concerns. This was serious, and the fact that he's recovering is a massive relief. So much so that she actually starts to cry, but why did she come? Ferdinand's asking this sincerely because Eustace gave her that message to stay in Ehrenfest, right? Oh, that? Yeah, she got it, but she did promise something else. To come save him no matter what. Besides, he's the one who called for her. Suddenly Ferdinand's pretty damn bashful. However, she's the reason he told her not to come, since Ferdinand is aware of what Everman ordered her to do. In fact, he got the same orders. Die so that she could complete her book. He tried to visit during the Interduchy tournament, but was refused by the statue because she was already in there. So, again, the country is on the line, so why did she come? And the answer is pretty damn obvious. She doesn't care about Jürgen Schmidt if he's not in it with her. So, screw Everman. Right? We finally get what Ferdinand's plan was all along. He had tried to visit Everman to complete his book so he could create a magic tool to give the royal family. Basically a new Grutricite. And that's what all that fate paper was for, and pretty damn obvious in hindsight. But Ferdinand's plan that she was ruining that Sigiswald overheard in his side story last volume was the fact that Rosemine beat him to the punch and got the rest of his book of Mestianora. And the funny thing is, she was working on the other side of this problem, with that whole adoption by the royal family to get them the Grutricite thing, but Ferdinand is annoyed that she didn't tell him anything about that. Yeah, her reports were just as lacking, so no one can really complain that they were kept in the dark. Anyway, time to get these handcuffs off, so she whips out some fey paper and shows Ferdinand her copy and play spell to get the magic circle to open them. He's pretty impressed, but learning it will have to come later. She gets up to get him a registration face stone so he can actually leave, but he demands to know what her Geduld is now that he has her alone. Really? Right now? It's kind of an emergency. And yeah, because he noticed her necklace. He'd always thought that her Geduld was the same as his, but here she is accepting a proposal from Sigiswald. She didn't mention that, but sure. Oh yeah, remember when she tried to publish Cinderella back in part 2? Whoops, she did the story for real. She clears up the misunderstanding that she isn't really happy about marrying Sigiswald. This adoption and engagement are to protect everyone she cares about. She's supposed to get the Gruchicite and basically just stay out of sight while Sigiswald does the actual ruling of the country. And is she okay being treated like that? No, not at all. Yeah, the parallels to what Ferdinand did for Ehrenfest are pretty apparent here, but she gives back Ferdinand's namestone and tells him she'll make sure he's not punished along with Det Lind, and return him to Ehrenfest with her new authority. She makes that sound way too easy, and Ferdinand suddenly has a fire lit under him. Besides, he won't be allowed to leave Arnsbach in such a state, but Rosemine tells him the duchy is going to be broken up as soon as they have a proper Zent, so don't really worry about it. Her retainers and her will watch over it in the meantime. Suddenly Ferdinand's eyes are glowing rainbow colored because the royals have seriously gone too far at this point, so Ferdinand's completely pissed. Putting him and Ehrenfest through all this and using Rosemine, only to throw the duchy they sunk all this work into away? There's no way he's gonna let them get away with this. Rosemine tries to escape using the sorry state of the duchy as an excuse here, but Ferdinand says they can just burn Arnsbach to the ground now with the Lanzanavians' actions as a good excuse. Oh shit, she can't let him do that, because while it would make things easier for him, it does complicate things for her. With her defending Arnsbach of all places suddenly, Ferdinand immediately picks up that she did something drastic, especially when she mentions that this could run the risk of violating the mana compression contract from way back in part 3. Yeah, she breaks the news that she stole Arnsbach's foundation to get into this hall. Ferdinand's operating system crashes and he takes a moment to reboot, but when he does, he asks her what the hell she was thinking. The obvious way would have been to find the Ob, torture them for the registration stones, and then force them to sign a magic contract as insurance. Great plan in theory, but Rosemine doesn't know what Alstida looks like or have the conviction to actually torture somebody, and we the audience know she's not even in the duchy right now, so that would have been a waste of time. Yeah, her methods were extreme, but they did solve the problem. She tells him once again to leave Arnsbach's cleanup to her, but Ferdinand is healthy enough to pinch her cheeks, and this one actually hurts. That's when he tells her that she's still dense as hell, so what does he want from her? Ask him for help. Det Lind incited rebellion against the Zent using a foreign country's power, her sister's an accomplice, Georgine is invading Ehrenfest, and Letizia is guilty of attempted murder. If anyone here knows Arnsbach's internal affairs in and out, it's gonna be Ferdinand, so he's Rosemine's best ally in sorting this mess. He makes a strong argument. So she accepts his help and the Lord of Evil springs into action right away, by figuring out her plans first. See, she can't exactly hold two foundations at once, so she'll have to give up Arnsbach to dye the countries. Or at the very least, get the magic tool from the archive to give the royals so they can dye the foundation. That would cause the least amount of friction here, but Ferdinand points out that that magic tool was fairly recent in terms of the country's history. Get your deep lore notebooks ready, because this is the biggest dump on the country's history to date. Ferdinand asks her about her understanding of the Book of Mestianora and Zent candidates, mostly to compare notes, and she tells him the book is the knowledge forced upon Zent candidates after following the steps she did in the academy, but since it's imprinted on their stop, it can't be passed down. The Gruchicite that is the current symbol of the Zent is a magic tool so that someone who failed to get the Book of Mestianora can still take the throne. That one can be passed down. The reason they transitioned from the book to the magic tool was a pretty long process, but back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for many people to obtain the Book of Mestianora, but as we know, the knowledge was just too much to absorb, so they inevitably had holes. That's what the Underground Archive is for, or specifically, that back section that opened up after she visited the shrines. It's for Zent candidates to fill in the gaps, quite literally, by writing the information they failed to absorb into their books directly, because it contains a written version of the completed Book of Mestianora. However, that's still not the Gruchicite that we know. This whole process of Zent candidates not having a completed book, but finishing it in the archive was all fine. That is until one dude who eventually became king ran into the issue where the Golden Shoe Mill rejected him for being too much of a warmonger, and he wasn't allowed to go visit Yverman to get the Book of Mestianora. But I'm sure you'll recall, Rosemine had the magic circle for creating the Gruchicite burned into her mind before even visiting Yverman. Thus this king took his empty shop that was in the shape of a Gruchicite and filled the entire book without getting the wisdom of Mestianora. Thus Jürgenschmidt got a Zent who loved war and looked down on the wisdom of the gods, which definitely widened the pool of future Zent candidates as only needing to be omni-elemental to get the shape of the Gruchicite so you could fill it yourself. Those who were still visiting the shrines were deemed as inferior candidates through a smear campaign, because these were the days when nobles still did religious ceremonies en masse, meaning most had a plethora of divine protections. But enter one Zent who got so tired of the non-stop fighting for the throne that she went and bitched to Eve Ehrman, since she actually had a true book of Mestianora. She came up with a plan that would stop the fighting by monopolizing the seat of Zent, since every duchy was producing Zent candidates at the time. She put a family check on the back of the underground archive to ensure that only her bloodline could enter, essentially establishing the royal family in the process. She then made 2 magic tools shaped like shoe mills to watch over the archive and guide Zent candidates, as well as purge those deemed a danger. Alright, Schwartz and Weiss did try to off Rosemine when she became a threat. Good to know. Then she moved her family from the Holy Land, which we call the Royal Academy in the story, to the newly established Royal Palace, and made the Holy Land accessible only by teleporters, thus ensuring the Zent could execute anyone unauthorized trying to obtain the Book of Mestianora. Remember when we heard the story of how Schwartz and Weiss were made? It was by a princess of the distant past? Yeah, it turns out they predate the concept of princesses in this country. Okay, so that sounds pretty bad, but her methods proved effective. The wars did stop for a time and there was peace, right? Well, no, because she clearly put too much faith in her bloodline, because later disputes just happened internally. Eventually, 2 brothers who fought for the throne both died, leaving their sickly brother to take it instead. Now, he did have a healthy son, but because he wasn't in too great of health, they moved religious ceremonies from the Holy Land to the newly constructed Sovereign Temple near the Royal Palace. Now that healthy son of his, he never moved the ceremonies back to the Holy Land, by the way, thus accidentally putting an end to the ceremonies in the Royal Academy, because he didn't know any better. But that also does explain why ceremonies are so crazy there in the first place, because it's the actual Holy Land closest to the gods, and that's when it became known as the Royal Academy, since it was only a place for kids to learn and get their stops. So where does this magic tool Gruchicite fit into this? Well, one idiot mother who doted on her son far too much wanted him to become Zent. The issue is, this kid only had 6 elements, and so his mother, the current Zent and a skilled magic tool crafter, made him a Gruchicite magic tool that could be used by anyone. He became the first Zent who was unfit to rule the country, without a proper Gruchicite or even the elements. But his successor was actually omni-elemental and competent enough that he probably could have gotten his own Book of Mestianora, had he wanted it, but since his father saw that magic tool as a symbol of his mother's love, he passed that on to him instead of letting him get an actual book. The issue is, it can be passed down, but when the owner dies, the magic tool vanishes and reappears in the back of the underground archive. Crazy that never happened until recently, but that does explain why no one found the Gruchicite ever since. We're about 5 layers of fucked up from the original Zent's design of this country, so it's no wonder that Jürgen Schmidt is struggling. So what's Rosemine's plan? Marry Sigiswald, mix mana, get the magic tool, and register it to his shop so he can rule. One small problem though, the magic tool is still written in an ancient language the royals refuse to learn. So that's pretty much out the window. Yeah, but also, Rosemine's just gonna get sucked into whatever bullshit the royals are stewing in. So Ferdinand wants to clean this mess up, cancel this adoption, and get her sent back to Ehrenfest. But does she even have a place there anymore? Actually no. Think about it. She spent the last year handing off work, and if she goes from giving the royals the Gruchicite to coming back to Ehrenfest, it would only cause problems as people would push for her to be the next Daub again, undermining a lot of people's hard work in the process. And that's ignoring all the people she's making move to the sovereignty with her. Yeah, they can't just say, oh never mind, I'm staying, please let me keep my job. Okay, so Ferdinand finally has a picture of what's going on, and while he and Rosemine argue about who should go back to Ehrenfest, he finally snaps and says they have a mess to clean up first. They're gonna wipe out Lanzanov and close the border gate, but Ferdinand still can't leave the mana replenishment hall, right? Yeah, the one time Detlind was actually thorough. So he tells her to go grab a registration face stone from the box Eustace moved to let her inside the mana replenishment hall, because that's where they're being stored. That way he can dye it, and she can slot it in outside so he can leave. And outside, they get started despite Ferdinand's help. He's putting up a hell of a facade here, but dude's probably barely hanging on, and he's still planning on charging into battle tonight? What a fucking boss. They bring him up to speed, that Letizia was taken with Strahl's daughter under Detlind's orders. Detlind and Elstita were last seen at the Lanzanov estate, but anyone who went there to beg them to put an end to all this madness hasn't been seen since. and now the estate's empty. Georgine was last heard from in old work stock for spring prayer, but that's probably a ruse, and is most likely in Ehrenfest by now. None of the Geebs there are replying to their ordinances either, so they're probably in on her scheme. Great, because Ferdinand's first thought was to just execute them with their medals. You know, there's a detail in a few volumes that'll make you wonder why he didn't do this anyway, but based on Georgine's planning skills, the odds of them having taken their citizenship medals with them is pretty damn high. With this realization, Rosemine wants to race back to Ehrenfest to protect its temple, but Ferdinand grounds her in the here and now. They need to sort out this Lanzanov mess so they can't keep rampaging. She is the current Archduchess, so it's her duty to do so, but that'll be a tall order, considering her and all the people she brought with her will just be seen as co-conspirators by the local nobles, and that's the far more likely assumption than that their own archducal family sold them out. So basically, be careful. Rosemine then lends Ferdinand the office to change into some more battle-ready attire, and outside, she sees Hannah-Laura's group with some wounded knights. What happened? Weren't they all unharmed during their initial attack? Well, yeah, but while she was in the mana replenishment hall, they tried attacking the Lanzanov ships, and even disguised some knights to get on board while they were still in the harbor. But turns out, these ships have some anti-aircraft-like weapons that fire silver bullets that shred high beasts. Oh, and the silver coating we first saw a few books ago makes them immune to mana, obviously. Yeah, essentially, Dunkelfelger got a bit carried away after seeing the initial Lanzanov showing, and their ships aren't a joke. They need to take them seriously. I think what makes this tense is the fact that nobles and magic have been presented as a pretty much undefeatable force to this point in the story. So seeing Lanzanov create weapons in case they had to go to war with Jürgenschmidt, and the fact that they can effectively hold them off without the element of surprise, makes them a tangible threat. Okay, good intel, and no casualties. So Rosemine heals them up, and the knights are trying to figure out how to deal some damage. Like maybe trying to drop some giant boulders on it or something. Though that could probably kill the hostages, so probably not the best idea. Some Arnsbach knights are in position at the border gate to send word when Lanzanov is moving that way, and a group of nobles also wish to meet their new wab here at the castle, but Anno put them in their place and sent them to a room to wait. However, their mission is essentially complete, so what is Dunkelfelger gonna do? Isitza speaks up, saying they'll join the attack once more because they haven't had their fill of dinner just yet. Not when Lanzanov is putting up an actual fight now. Good to know. But while the knights talk strategy, Anno suggests that Rosemine put the necklace she's wearing away, since it's starting to break apart. Wait, really? Well, yeah. Turns out this is a courtship necklace that emits mana. But when there's a substantial gap between the giver and receiver, the necklace usually breaks down into gold dust. Basically, her mana is overwhelming Sigiswald's. Well, yeah, she did use a ton today, between supplying the country gate, teleportation spells, and dyeing the foundation in one go. But wait, this can't be a courtship necklace. She learned about those in class. This doesn't look like those. Well, no. What she learned about was a proposal face stone, which are much higher quality. These are lower and just a statement of intent. Oh, that explains how Ferdinand knew about her engagement. Wait, so does this mean everyone knew and she was the only one in the dark about what this meant? Yeah, pretty much. Classic Rosemine. So Hartmut steps up to give her some cloth to wrap the necklace in and stuff it in a bag to avoid it breaking. I want to point out, Rosemine is entirely clueless in this scene, like, she doesn't get why Sigiswald made her a courtship necklace when she just needed a symbol of their authority. Their marriage is just by royal decree after all, so he could have just given her a proposal face stone. But we the audience know the dude's probably got some feelings for her based off his side story from last volume. I mean, not developed feelings, but attraction at the very least. Ferdinand finally steps out and sees that Dunkelfelger is there too. That makes him grimace. Why are they there? Well, she needed help and negotiated some assistance. And that's when our boy steps forward and gives Ferdinand his cape, and adamantly swears to an honorable duel at a later date. Ferdinand tries to tell him to fuck off, but Isitza isn't taking no for an answer. Okay, skip the romantic banter between these two bros because they do still have a crisis to end. So Ferdinand says he'll take Isitza to Ehrenfest after all. Wait, what? Oh right, defending one's treasure is part of dinner too, isn't it? The battle for Arnsbach is merely the opening act, so the game won't end until Ehrenfest Foundation is safe as well. Anno is at a loss, but the rest of the knights are stoked for their game to continue. Thus, Ferdinand issues some more orders. Eustace is to coax out the hiding nobles and gather intelligence, while Clarissa and Hartmut put their zealotry to use and evangelize the Saint of Ehrenfest to all the Arnsbach nobles they've got on standby to bolster her position as Ob. Great. So with that, Ferdinand turns to Rosemind to make sure she's in good enough shape to finish this, and she replies that she is. It's up to her as Ob to get her duchy under control. So they head out after getting word that Lanzanov is on the move to meet up with the Arnsbach Knights. They nearly attack her panda bus saying it's a grun, but some do have enough sense to point out that it's their new Ob's High Beast. Close call, that could have been an execution right there. This is their chance to organize a plan where Ferdinand breaks the knights into groups of 10s, with captains while Rosemind distributes magic tools. And Aurora is joining the fight as well, and even has some wolf-on yells she caught in the nobles' quarter. What are those? They're kept as pets by some nobles, kinda like shoe mills, but they're sort of ravenous dogs that devour anything that moves with less mana than them. Luckily, Hannelore an Archduke candidate from a greater duchy. Okay, so Ferdinand dishes out orders at this point, where Hannelore's group will tackle one of the ships still loading up in port. But for the 2 ships in motion already, Ferdinand points out a key quirk. They'll need to transform into their black exterior to actually use the country gate, as it's just a massive teleporter. That's when they'll finally be vulnerable to strike, so they'll have to wait until then. If the Lanzanovians are smart, they won't transform both of their ships at the same time. But that first ship? Oh, it's gonna get smashed to pieces by a horde of knights with mana blasts. However, that does raise a good point. What about the prisoners on board? They're still alive, right? Well, turns out, there's a neat perk of being an Ob. Ferdinand wants Rosemind to grant the Ob's protection to all those on board right before the knights launch their attack, which takes a ton of mana by the way, so she'll need to conserve as much as she can, meaning when they head out, Rosemind will need to ride on Ferdinand's High Beast. That seems weird, or rather kinda bad, as Leonore steps up to defend her lady's honor. In this context, based on her appearance, Ferdinand does not look to be her guardian, more like a romantic partner. This would be incredibly inappropriate, but he claps back with raw logic. Rosemind needs to be visible so the Arnsbach population recognizes her as the Ob. Remember, they did almost attack her High Beast earlier because it's unfamiliar, so that's not a great idea. And she's also going to be using Archduke magic, which normal nobles shouldn't hear, because it's meant to be kept a secret. Retainers aren't even allowed in the class it's taught in. So hey, real quick, you might notice, she needs an Archduke candidate of the same sex to ride with, so why not Hannelore, right? Well, a few things. She already has a job to do, and has a drivable High Beast as well, so basically that's not gonna work. I fought this ship so hard for the longest time, and I'm still not 100% sold on it. I mean, come on, let's face it, Hannelore is her one true love anyway. But the series doesn't really shove the Ferdinand's romance angle down your throat. Like, these two have always had such great chemistry, and love doesn't really factor in the moment. It's just about what's convenient. But do remember, she asks the Lord of Evil for help, and he's got a plan. Eckhart shuts up the biggest dissenter, Cornelius, with some harsh words, and they get moving. They don't have time for this shit. They head off to the port first, where they notice the commoners are fighting off the Lanzanovians. Oh, so that's what was holding them up. That changes plans somewhat, so Rosemind will use the Ob's protection first before Hannelore goes in with her Fabies. Rosemind fires off the spell, and it's a giant bird-shaped mana blast that showers down gold on everyone registered as a citizen of their duchy. It doesn't last long, but while it's active, those affected cannot be harmed. And while she's at it, she even throws some healing in for the commoners too, causing them to be freaked out a bit that they just got saved by nobles. We'll hear about that in a few volumes. But as for the Arnsbach nobles, this basically sold them, since it's undeniable now that Rosemind died their foundation, because she's giving this protection. If this seems familiar, it should. It's the same spell Sylvester shot out during Spring Prayer back in part 2. At the time it seemed like an attack, but no. He was protecting his citizens while Karstedt went all out. With that left to Hannelore's group, Ferdinand and the rest head out to sea to go snag the last 2 Lanzanov ships heading for the gate. Yeah, as it turns out, there were 2 at the port, and the last one just went up in smoke, with a disguised Dunkelfelger Knight stepping out onto deck. Cool. Rosemind had to spot that for Ferdinand because he's not recovered enough to use enhancement magic while driving his High Beast. So that really goes to show just how much he's pushing himself right now. That just leaves the 2 heading for the border gate, and their first plan is the easiest one. Wait for the ship to transform and then smash it hard. But the second one? Well, that's going to be tricky because it's probably just going to turtle up, and then they'll be in a stalemate. Ferdinand asks her if she has any ideas on how to destroy it, but she really doesn't. Just because she has memories from another world without mana doesn't mean she knows what mechanisms these ships use to transform, or what these silver panels even are. Could they be metal or just paint? Who knows? But while she ponders the possibilities, the first ship transforms. Showtime. So she casts the protection spell to save the prisoners, while the knights smash it to pieces. That works almost too well, as the second squad comes with a net made out of bands of light to save the noble hostages. Or rather, maybe it's a stop transformation. Ferdinand did use that in part 3. Who knows, point is, they're saved with the net made of light. The silver cloth here prevents the Lanzanavians from being saved, which is funny, but also tragic because they'll either drown or make it to the country gate. However, since they don't have mana to activate it, probably don't have the registration face stone on them, and they're going to be wearing the silver cloth, they're pretty much just going to be trapped on the other side, stuck to wander the white desert until they die. Yeah, that silver cloth came back to bite them in the ass. And what about that last ship? Well, just as expected, it's not transforming. In fact, some slick silver boxes that fire bullets pop up and show just how desperate they're feeling. Great, so they really need a plan, or the hostages on board are probably going to be in serious danger. Well, maybe they could just use an impromptu Entwin kiln to block the guns? No, probably not. That would require somebody to measure gold dust mana? Oh, and getting within firing range to cast the spell. So definitely not, and no. The necklace turning into gold dust isn't going to be enough for an Entwin kiln. Okay, well, maybe freezing it could work. Too bad elemental magic isn't a thing in this setting. Or is it? A Weagleap sword could do the trick, but recall from Volume 2, it can only be used during winter, and last I checked, it's currently spring. Also, Arensbach is just way hotter than Ehrenfest, though actually, that does give Ferdinand an idea. It may not be winter right now, but can't they just summon it in a localized spot to use the sword? How the hell are they gonna do that? That even sounds crazy to Rosemine. Simple. By modifying the spring summoning circle from Haldensel. But who's gonna supply the mana for that, and how are they gonna even draw the circle? Oh, never mind. Rosemine's got that covered with some extra Fey paper from Clarissa. Oh, and Fey stones packed with Elstita's magic that she took from the Foundation. That surprises Ferdinand, but sure. Yeah, I called a Weagleap's sword useless back in my Volume 2 video, and I stand by that claim. Summoning winter is an extreme outlier use case for this thing, so don't think that suddenly makes it viable in the meta. Okay, Hysitza doesn't really get it, but sure, they're gonna summon winter to use a Weagleap sword. At this point, what can't Ehrenfest do, so why question it? But who's gonna pull off this feat? Ferdinand's not at 100%. Rosemine needs to save her mana for the protection, and the sword drains all the mana of whoever uses it. Oh wait, didn't Hartmut and Cornelius compete to see who could make the thing first at the beginning of this part? Well, here's the payoff. However, one person won't be enough. They need a few swings to freeze this ship entirely and take it down. Luckily, Lorenz and Matthias learned over the last year, so they can form it too, even if their mana isn't as good as Cornelius. But for good measure, Ferdinand has Rosemine summon Hartmut to give it a shot as well. Also bring Clarissa to show the captive Arensbach noble some splendid Saint of Ehrenfest propaganda. So the ordnances fly out, and the team assembles for a hell of a display, while Ferdinand uses Rosemine's back as a desk to write the magic circles on some Fey paper. The plan is, once the ship is frozen and the summoned Fey beasts die, Hysitza's group will smash the ship with their biggest attacks to finish the job, while Rosemine does the protection, and with the circle finally complete, they can enact it. Scary thing is, this works pretty easily. The magic circle summons winter, making it noticeably colder, and that's when they use the divine instruments to freeze the ship while praying. Dunkelfelger then follows up with a wombo combo of Leidenschaft spears to crack open the silver plates, creating enough of a gap for attacks to find purchase and tear the hull open. At that point, Eckhart leads a group inside to capture the whole thing with little resistance. Rosemine notices that they rescued Letizia, but before they can go celebrate, Ferdinand has a pretty important question for her. How are they going to treat Letizia? Because how they do so will set the tone for this girl's future. Will she be family to the criminals, an attempted murderer, or just a victim? Though at the end of it all, she's still going to be under surveillance for the time being. But Rosemine makes it clear, she was tricked into this attack, so she's a victim here. Thus, that's how they go about it. Why is this so important to sort out now of all times? Simple. It's to get ahead of any rumors. Them treating her as a victim right now does allow them to swap their stance to criminal after an investigation at a later date. But if they decide she's useful to keep around, this doesn't tarnish her reputation. Let's just say this is a useful tool for later on in the story. So landing on the ship, Letizia is relieved that Ferdinand is safe and tries to apologize, but he immediately silences her by saying that it was thanks to her reaching Eckhart and Eustace, where she actually manages to read between the lines to shut up. though her reaction to Rosemine is pretty funny. But hey, she's the new Ob and decided to rescue Letizia, so that's a pretty clear message. Thus she thanks Rosemine, but her work has only just begun, because now that the battle is basically wrapped up, Ferdinand puts Letizia to work preparing the castle to host Dunkelfelger. Really? This girl's clearly traumatized and Ferdinand's just gonna put her right to work? Well, yeah, because giving her a task will prevent her from wallowing in today's events. Even if just a little bit, she's gonna need an outlet for her stress, so this'll work. So thus, Rosemine accepts it, and Letizia starts addressing Roswitha to help with the preparations before Fairzeala steps in and comforts her lady by saying she'll take over. But before they leave, Fairzeala does ask Ferdinand if her father protected the nobles of Arnsbach, fully expecting him to have perished in the fighting. But Ferdinand does give her some much-deserved relief by saying that he did, and that he's currently rescuing others by the border gate. At least somebody got a happy ending. From there, they order everyone to gather up the silver cloth and weapons for use in the sovereignty in Ehrenfest, while Ferdinand and Rosemine head off to go close the border and country gates, silencing Rosemine from saying she can't because he's trying to keep his book a secret. But as they fly over to the country gate to close it, Ferdinand has Rosemine lift her Grutricite high up in the air for a show, while he creates his on the down low. They then fly into the already open roof because Rosemine forgot to close it, with Leonore hitting a barrier because she's not traveling with somebody who has a Book of Mestianora, or going through the stairway to it. Before she can piece that puzzle together, Ferdinand instructs Rosemine to close the roof so he can close the gate. Okay, so now that it's just the two of them and the crisis is pretty much over, he can pick up the conversation from the replenishment hall where they left off. What is Rosemine going to do? Because as they both see it, she has 4 options open to her. She could give up Arnsbach's foundation and marry Sigiswald for a miserable life, die Jürgenschmidt's foundation and become the next Zent after her adoption, give the magic tool Grutricite to the royals and just live as Ob Arnsbach, or still do that first half and hand over the foundation too to return to Ehrenfest, where she'll probably be pestered for the rest of her days to become the next Ob. Yeah, there's some nuance, but as Ferdinand sees it, those are essentially it. So which does she choose? Because he kinda needs an answer before he finishes closing the country gate, as it's gonna impact their next course of action. Great. But he pretty much closes off 2 paths to her right away. He won't let her be miserable because she forbade him from doing that when he moved to Arnsbach, and he's also opposed to her becoming Zent because she'll suck at it, which is actually good news, because those were her least appealing options by far. Would Rosemine actually make a great ruler? No. She wouldn't. Her methods show results, but she frequently causes friction in political situations. Like, on paper she's good, but in terms of maintaining the complex relationships of factions and duchies, the country would swiftly devolve into another civil war, assuming she doesn't tear it apart first for her own selfish reasons. So, too bad politics is pretty fundamental to running a country, because our gremlin kinda sucks at relationships. Okay, well, could she just give Ferdinand the magic tool so he could rule the country instead? Oh, does she really want that? I thought she was trying to reduce Ferdinand's workload. He's trying to dump ruling the country off on him? Actually, no. She wants him to retire and live in peace in Ehrenfest, because she actually values Ferdinand, so with those options eliminated, that allows Ferdinand to lay out his ideal route. He wants her to stay on as Ob Arnsbach. The duchy's already committed high treason, so it's gonna need to be rebuilt from the ground up. What does that mean? Well, her library city that she's been trying to make since the end of part 4, that could actually become a reality finally. But hold on, Ferdinand was opposed to that idea when he was tutoring her before. Why is he suddenly trying to entice her with it now? The Lord of Evil just never gives out freebies, so there's obviously an ulterior motive. But he explains that simply enough, it would have been a dumb idea for Ehrenfest since it's already an established duchy with a culture and economy. Arnsbach is literally seeing its main trading partner getting sealed out of the country forever, like as they speak. So they're going to need a new industry to stay afloat. On top of that, sweeping changes to the government and duchy as a whole will be needed, so this will be a great chance for her to turn books into their industry and export, while entertaining all of those plans she put on the back burner like temple classrooms to educate the commoners and such. Literally, Arnsbach could become her playground. And the kicker? The magic contract she signed that forbade her from interacting with her family as such only applies in Ehrenfest. Ferdinand would ensure that she would spend time with them at least once a season. Hell, she's the Ob. She could even set up a teleporter directly into their house, just to have all of her commoner associates move to Arnsbach instead of the sovereignty. Really not that much of a difference to them. Yeah, this is all starting to sound way too good to be true, so What's the catch? Well, there's barely one at all. Ferdinand would like a research facility connected to her library so he could easily look up anything he needs. He just wants a place to raise some fae plants, fae beasts, and fae fish. That way he can conduct a ton of experiments. And in exchange for that, he'll even let her publish his findings as new books. Damn, that really does sound appealing. And apparently Sylvester shot this all down before, but Ferdinand is willing to supply the mana and gold dust. But in exchange, she'll need his help running the duchy. Oh, is that all? That's barely a condition, so she throws in some guaranteed time with her family. Hell, Hartmut even knows about her past. He can help schedule time for her to do it too. This is all working out way too well, so yeah, she's sold on the whole being of Arnsbach now. Sign her up. And with that, she and Ferdinand are on the same page for a strategy. So Ferdinand goes to close the country gate, but he needs her to complete the magic circle for him. Her section of this was so small that Ferdinand probably could have figured it out on his own, but he writes it into his own book with a stylo, confirming that Ferdinand does in fact have 2 stops, like we suspected way back in Volume 3. And thus they conclude the ordeal in Arnsbach by closing the country gate. Weird. It took less mana than he expected. Well, that's probably because Rosemine filled it with mana back at Ehrenfest and Dunkelfelger, the 2 gates on either side of this one. Wow, I really wonder why filling the gates is taking less mana than before. It's almost like they're connected in some kind of magic circle or something. Oh wait, wasn't that mentioned last book? I'm sure it won't come up again. Anyway, they should probably make an effort to supply the rest of the country gates, but that's a job for later. While Arnsbach is now cleared up, Ehrenfest is still mid-crisis, so they leave the country gate, where Ferdinand instructs her to close the border gate as well, and they head back to the castle where they plan to rest before chasing after Georgine into Ehrenfest. Though Ferdinand does tell Rosemine to take a double dose of potion before going to sleep, or else she won't be allowed to go. The reason being she's grown now, so she actually needs more than previous. Ferdinand's gonna go to sleep in his hidden room. I mean, it's not like Arnsbach didn't just try to kill him, so he definitely feels safe there. On the way back to the castle, Leonore scolds her for disappearing with Ferdinand. Both he and she need to worry about her image, more so than ever with her new age-appropriate appearance. After all, she is still publicly engaged to Wilfried, and their actions scream that they were an intimate couple to any onlookers. What the hell was he thinking? Because Ferdinand, of all people, definitely knew better. So why the hell was he even proposing it in the first place? Guess we'll find out later. Back in the castle, Clarissa welcomes her with the newly brainwashed Arnsbach nobles now praising her like one of the gods. Letizia already prepared a guest room for her where she'll sleep in her panda bus to keep herself safe. But while walking, she bumps into Heisitza drinking while Hannah-Laura is away. Oh, is it common to get drunk mid-dinner game in Dunkelfelger? Maybe Ferdinand won't take them to Ehrenfest after all. So with that, they clean up their premature party while Rosemine rests. They played themselves honestly, but that's kind of the story of Dunkelfelger in this franchise, so not surprised. And 2 days later, yes, 2 whole days, Rosemine wakes up in her high beast feeling refreshed. Leonore informs her about what happened while she was passed out, namely Ferdinand didn't rest much due to Dunkelfelger's rowdiness, so he's already leading them to Ehrenfest to attack Georgine. Yeah, they were eating all the food stores, and challenging the Arnsbach Knights to ditter as training in massive air quotes. Yikes. So, he really didn't have a choice here, but Ferdinand did leave her a message, fully aware that she would wake up in 2 or 3 days' time, that she should follow after him. That's when Farzila comes in to help Rosemine get ready. They talk as she does her hair, and obviously Farzila is grateful for what Rosemine did for not just her lady, but the duchy as a whole. The nobles Hartmut and Clarissa brainwashed that night are being forced onto those captured by Lanzanov to build a faction for Rosemine, essentially, because they're now painfully aware how similar their situation is to old Eisenreich. But lucky for them, Rosemine is the avatar of Mestianora there to save Arnsbach in its time of need, and give the Grutricite to the royal family. Wait, where did Farzila hear that? Oh, Ferdinand's been spreading some propaganda of his own. Fucking great. Changing the subject now, Farzila is wearing her Arnsbach cape that seems to have a yellow and blue cross on it. What's that about? Also, does she usually wear that while working? Seems to be kinda getting in her way. Yeah, this is a new development, and how they can deem who's been judged already. If they see somebody walking around without this cross on their cape, they immediately interrogate them to see if they pose a threat to the new Wab. Ferdinand set up shoots Zarya's shield over Rosemine's high beast while she was asleep, and had all the nobles they captured run through it to see if they held a grudge. With her brought up to speed, she's ready to teleport to Ferdinand after a quick meal with Letizia and Hannelore, but Cornelius tells her to contact Ferdinand first to see where she should teleport to. Her plan was to just hit up the border gate with Ehrenfest, but it's most likely under enemy control due to the fact that Hartmut's letters can't get through. But Clarissa's seem to, probably because she's from Dunkelfelger, and Ferdinand confirms via ordnance that she should wait for him to contact her before she goes anywhere. Yeah, you wouldn't want to teleport into a hostile noble tea party, right? That would be awkward. So Cornelius asks about the elephant in the room. Is she going to stay in Arnsbach? Because that's what Ferdinand's been telling everyone, and she explains that she wants to, but that's more like a dream than anything else. All that talk about her library city and such is nice, but even Rosemine acknowledges that her plans rarely go as she expects them to in this series. The royal adoption she's staring down would probably make her being the new Wab impossible. Even without the Gertrude site in the equation, the royals still want her for her mana and religious knowledge. So yeah, while nice, it's probably not happening. From there, she meets up with Letizia and Hannelore for her breakfast. It's taken her this long to realize what this cross actually means on the capes after she sees Letizia wearing one, despite not being old enough to attend the academy. It symbolizes subjugation by Dunkelfelger and Ehrenfest. It also helps them avoid friendly fire in combat. She gets more info about this situation, where the knights have already raided the Lanzanov estate and confirmed the door to the Adalgisa villa. You might be worried that Detlin could either come through that or maybe even the academy, but since Rosemine's the Ob now, those on the other side can't use it without permission. That extends to the academy dorm and teleporter. Those still require brooches and such, and the old Ob's mana won't work on them anymore. So basically, Detlin's group is stranded in the sovereignty now, because the mana in their brooches doesn't match the mana in the foundation. In the meantime, Arnsbach scholars are pushing face stones to citizenship medals to identify who was killed in the Lanzanov raid. Letizia is choked up and clearly blames herself, but Ferdinand said the casualties were minimized due to Letizia and Strahl. So, there's some consolation at least. But after their meal, Rosemine and Hannelore need to catch up to Ferdinand to save Ehrenfest, though Hannelore is wondering if it's really okay to just abandon Arnsbach's foundation, since they just stole it as their treasure. And true, but honestly, not really an issue. For one, she still has the backup method that let her into the foundation, while Elstida presumably has the key on her person and she's not even in the duchy right now. They know that for a fact. But even if she didn't, who the hell wants this duchy mid-rebellion? If someone's dumb enough to take it from her, she can simply steal it back, or fuck it, just let them have it and deal with the fallout. Oh, speaking of guarding treasure, that's Hannellore's job and why she remained behind. It wasn't for her safety, but actually for Rosemine's. We're really struggling to beat the Yuri allegations on this one. Time to meet up with Ferdinand. She goes to an empty room to draw a teleporter large enough to move all their knights. The Arnsbach knights accompanying them are fully brainwashed at this point, and praise Rosemine in the same breath as the gods. Gross. Hartmut really did a number on these guys. Anyway, they're gonna teleport to the province closest to Ehrenfest border gate, but that's when Ferdinand fires off an ordnance telling them to change their plans. Go to Bindewald instead. Word came that knights crossed the border there into Gerlach just the previous night. Okay, so Rosemine chants the spell, whisking her and her group off to Bindewald, the province of the asshole who started this mess way back in part 2. And the first thing that greets her is the shrill voice of a woman she'd rather never think about again. Yeah, racing over from their tea party in the garden is none other than Professor Frau Larm, or just Frau Larm, as Hannelore reminds her. Also, her sister is there, the previous Geeb's wife. Gross. But Hannelore isn't putting up with this crap and binds the two in light when the two women approach to bash Ehrenfest openly. That's when Frau Larm notices Rosemine and launches into a spite-filled rant about how she should be dead already, and also is just a filthy commoner. Her retainers aren't gonna put up with this shit anymore though, because she's not a professor, and now she's bad-mouthing her current Ob. Hartmut in particular finally reveals that they knew about the slow-acting poison on their Bible, and they took care of it before Rosemine ever touched it. But based on Frau Larm's shocked reaction to that news, she clearly knew about that poison in the first place. She fucked up. As for the commoner allegations, Bindewald's wife is just pissed off that her husband committed a crime and is being held in another duchy. Besides, Hannelore backs up Rosemine by saying just how amazing she is. It's unlikely a commoner could get blessings that big, come first in class at the Royal Academy multiple years in a row, and beat Dunkelfelger at Ditter. Too bad she did those things as a former commoner. Let's just keep that as our little secret, huh? Now Leonore steps in to deliver the fatal blow. Just how shameful would it be for a supposed former commoner to have stolen a greater duchy's foundation? No way that's true. Just more lies, right? Well, she did just use the teleporter that only the Ob can use right in front of these two, and the Arensbach Knights look visibly disgusted by Frau Larm and her sister's attitude. They witnessed Rosemine use the Gurchasite and close the country and border gates themselves. They plead with both of them to shut up before they make their duchy look any worse. But at this point, Frau Larm devolves into a screeching mess. That's when Cornelius puts his foot down, literally on Frau Larm's head, and tells her to shut the hell up and quit dissing his little sister in front of him. Cornelius is about to kill this bitch, and I'm here for it. Yeah, we always knew Frau Larm was evil, but here's the confirmation. No longer subtext, it's just plain text. That's when Ferdinand and Eckhart's group arrive with the Hall of Nobles they caught returning from Ehrenfest. Turns out they had those small chalices on them that Ferdinand foreshadowed about last volume. That's when he quickly launches into a medical exam to make sure Rosemine is okay, where Frau Larm balks about how perverse they're being in public. But is it though? Well, considering it's a medical exam, she's the one who must have her mind in the gutter. But Ferdinand is being awfully selective here, because most others have already raised their concerns about him doing this in the past. Just not to either of them. Anyway, Eckhart shuts Frau Larm up with a gag, and Ferdinand asks Rosemine if she's really coming to Ehrenfest, because there's going to be a battle, and surely there's going to be a lot she doesn't want to see. Yeah, but she's also resolved to see this through. She is the current Ob Arensbach, right? In the meantime, Frau Larm and her sister were the welcoming party for the returning nobles from their raid in Ehrenfest. The Arensbach Knights already swept the mansion while that exchange was going on, and captured the servants and underage children still present. Yeah, a pretty nasty picture is forming here, since Ferdinand's Hall was using black weapons to steal the mana from Ehrenfest land. They were then storing it in the small chalices. Why? That would drain mana from the foundation indirectly, thus weakening it for Georgine to die. But what would those nobles do with that mana afterward? Well, considering they're from old Workstock, they might just be taking it to their home provinces. Griebel and Ilgner were attacked as well on Ehrenfest's side, but the main target does seem to be Gerlach. In fact, the battle is ongoing, and leading the charge there is a man with a prosthetic arm who seems to know the area very well, and is really close to Georgine. Yeah, it's Grousome. Suddenly Rosemine is worried about Matthias, but he's ready to take down his father. Okay, so they've got a priority, but what are they gonna do with these prisoners? Send their asses back to the castle and lock them up. When they get back to Bindewald, they beeline right for the border on Highbeast. And because they're not using the gate, Sylvester will be aware of their entry, so Rosemine's gonna have to send an ordnance once they're over to let him know they're friendlies, and that they're his reinforcements and not Georgine's. As for the state of Bindewald, turns out they've been making sure their estate grounds are filled with mana while neglecting the commoners. So it's pretty damn dire. She wants to replenish the land, but Spring Prayer can wait. They kinda have bigger issues. And once they see Gerlach, they notice the brown patches of otherwise green grass that looks like a Trombe rampage through. So this has been foreshadowed a few times already. Florencia mentioned how bad the land in Old Workstock was, Ferdinand talked about how you could misuse the chalices, and then the black weapons were a concern for warfare back in part 4. Remember, that's why the spell's not taught in the academy. Those threads all finally culminate here in the climax. So the actual battle for Gerlach isn't going too great. The Gieb's forces are slowly losing the conflict while small groups are stealing mana. Rosemine tells Ferdinand they should probably meet up with Gieb Gerlach since he's probably got a ton of magic tools prepared for this battle, and is most likely just lacking the knights to use them. Sounds good, but why not wipe out some of these smaller groups of enemies on the way? Rosemine and Hannelore stay airborne with their retainers while Ferdinand, Stroll, and Heisitza all split up to go take out the Gieb stealing mana. Meanwhile, Matthias and Lorenz go to check on the stashes that Grousome left to see if he's raided them for their magic tools. The battle is hitting Matthias pretty damn hard, since the dude was raised in Gerlach and his father, its former Gieb, is behind its destruction. Like, what is he thinking? While everyone is away, Rosemine contacts Sylvester to let him know they just arrived and asks for permission backing up the Gerlach Knights. As they wait for his reply, the old Workstock Knights make their move, and 6 platoons spring into action. But that's when Sylvester's response arrives, giving them permission to use military force. So she lets Ferdinand know, and as soon as that happens, some huge blasts go off from their knights, taking out the old Workstock groups. But their goal here was to capture them and interrogate the Geebs to find out what their plan was. And as it turns out, they were stealing the mana to store in chalices not because Georgine is going to destroy Ehrenfest or use that mana in old Workstock. Their plan was to move to Ehrenfest after Georgine became its new ob. They were then going to take up residence as the new Geebs with their former commoners. They were storing that mana to replenish the land as soon as they won the war. So, from their perspective, they're incredibly desperate. Without a real ob, the land can't be replenished through Spring Prayer. So they're watching their people slowly starve after over a decade, at this point going on 2, without an Archduke. They essentially feel that the royals just abandoned them, and even getting a new Ob Arnsbach couldn't really do shit because of the duchy border. It wouldn't let her fill their land with mana. So the problem is, Georgine gave them hope, and that's why they're following her. And this right here is why the fallen duchies are such an issue and continue to resist the royal family. The territories are under Greater Duchy management, but that really means nothing. The lands are a burden, and their citizens can't be properly integrated into their new duchies. But from the people there's perspective, they've been just basically abandoned. This is why they won't fall in line until a new Zent takes the throne. Okay, so while she sympathizes with their reasoning, she's still the current Ob Arnsbach, and they did this while wearing her duchy's colors. Thus, Rosemine has the Arnsbach Knights take them back over the border to the Bindewald estate as prisoners. Though it sucks, they were just being manipulated by Georgine too. But no time to dwell on that. Old Workstock's Knights are regrouping for the main charge on the estate, and Rosemine has to take them down as the Ob responsible for them. The battle for Gerlach kicks off as 4th bell chimes. Well, I bet you're excited to know what happens, right? Too bad, because that's gonna have to wait until next video. Slight spoiler, but the climax takes place over 3 volumes because it's split into 3 distinct phases, and we just saw the first with the battle for Arnsbach. The epilogue picks up from Georgine's perspective. It's right after she got the ordnance from Det Lind saying that Ferdinand was killed, so that kicks off her next phase. Georgine pretty much saw this entire situation playing out as she expected. By taking Roswitha hostage, Letizia would grow unstable and beg for Ferdinand to help, since he was the only one she was close to. That just meant positioning Leonzio to slip her the poison and Trug-dosed candy. Oh yeah, the candy also had Trug as well as the antidote in it, which was hinted at last volume, but confirmed here. Georgine knew that Ferdinand wouldn't agree to help, and actually says that he's incredibly easy to read compared to Det Lind or Sylvester. Why? Well, because Georgine and Ferdinand are cut from the same cloth. Both are cold and calculating. The only thing Georgine didn't account for was just how quickly Letizia would buckle. She was actually expecting her to wait a few more days. Because she's an Archduke candidate who didn't deal with a cutthroat competition for the seat, she's pretty soft and easy to manipulate as a result. Grausom comments how he assumed that Letizia might be more like Georgine since neither of them really had a mother to rely on, but Georgine corrects that misunderstanding. Letizia didn't have a mother at all, whereas Georgine only expected her to cause her pain. Thus she grew up constantly aware of everything going on around her and being exceedingly careful. Sound familiar? Yeah, we get here that Georgine hates both of her parents, and this story only gets worse the more we find out. On the other hand, she's been very careful of Ferdinand as she saw him as a huge threat. But with him and Letizia taken care of, they can finally invade Ehrenfest and steal its foundation. Yeah, they know Eckhart and Eustace will try to reach Sylvester, but since they control the border gate, there's no way they're gonna make it in time. That just leaves one person left to be cautious of in Ehrenfest, and it's Bonifatius. The dude, much like Sylvester, can just bulldoze pretty much any carefully laid trap with ease by sheer instinct, and think nothing of doing it in the process. Yeah, that's the absolute worst enemy for people like Georgine and Grausom, who planned every minute detail. Their plan is pretty simple. Attack Ilgner and the other border provinces to draw Bonifatius and the Knights Order away, while Georgine slips in behind enemy lines to steal the Foundation from Sylvester before anyone even notices what happened. So with that, Grausom will lead the distraction, and they see each other off. Thus, Georgine slips into Ehrenfest by carriage using silver cloth, but rather than going to Gerlach, she and her attendant go with the devouring contract merchant Grausom employs named Laugo. They're undercover as his attendants, but the dude's gonna get them into Lie's gang to board a ship heading for Ehrenfest capital, and his payment for such as black face stones. Yeah, his supply was cut off about a year ago, so he's all over this job. The most ingenious part is, this dude is actually a merchant who's been in business for a while, so that makes him not suspicious at all. I think what's interesting here is just how simple but effective Georgine's plan is. Every detail is in place and not hard to execute, which is what makes her so terrifying. On their few-day trip by boat, Georgine spends her time reminiscing about her awful memories in Ehrenfest. She was born as the first daughter, but because there wasn't a male heir, Karstedt was being raised as a backup Archduke candidate still, so her mother drilled into her from a young age that she needs to beat Karstedt and become Archduchess to save her from the Lies gangs. When Constance came along, Veronica didn't even hide her contempt and neglected the girl. That's why she turned out halfway decent. But this also means that Georgine stepped up to help raise her sister somewhat, with basically the same education that she got, but that only grew the distance between them. Yeah, Georgine didn't realize at the time, and her retainers didn't want to hurt her by telling her the truth, but her education was just too strict to force on a child, which is doubly cruel because it was forced on her in the first place. But this reinforced the idea in her head that if she beat Karstedt, she could finally win her mother's love. That's fucking sad. So yeah, that was a bad takeaway from all this, because as we've learned throughout this entire story, Veronica's a selfish bitch, which became entirely apparent as soon as Sylvester was born and she started doting on him as he made zero effort. Karstedt had at least been a good rival for Georgine, because they both stood about the same chance of becoming off, but Sylvester won that contest hands down, as being the only direct male heir from the current Archduke. Thus Karstedt became just an archnoble, and surely Georgine would be next unless she tried even harder, right? Things didn't get easier though, as Riarda was stolen from Georgine and given to Sylvester right before she was baptized, at a key time for a noble girl, mind you. So that hit even harder. That's when she started to actively wish that Sylvester would just up and die, and when she would go visit in the main building, Veronica would scold her for holding Sylvester to the same standard she was held to, even saying she didn't have enough love for her brother, which wasn't true. She didn't have any at all. The Royal Academy didn't fix issues either. All of her first choices for retainers were taken and instead promised to Sylvester. Okay, her mother is useless, so maybe she just needs to impress her father. He set her up with a fiancé from an archducal family to help her stay in the running for the seat. But even that came crumbling down. At Sylvester's baptism, Veronica said that Sylvester would be the next stop, publicly, in front of the entire noble population. Well, they had to act quickly to fix that mistake, but her father didn't. And soon, it was just fact. Thus, her fiancé canceled their engagement due to their contract being void, as she wasn't going to be the next Ob Ehrenfest. So from her perspective at this point, Sylvester just keeps taking and taking from her. So what can she do? They're putting the duchy in a fool's hand who can't even do the job. Adding insult to injury, Sylvester showed very little interest in ruling in the first place, and just told Georgine to be Ob instead. To which she desperately wanted to reply telling him to just die then. As her frustrations grew, a certain med scholar approached her and told her to use Veronica's methods, take names to build a support base, and publicly out Sylvester as a fool while bragging about her own accomplishments. And thus, he became among the first to offer his name. At the same time, Georgine took the scholar course to learn medicine so she could poison her little brother. Her father found out about her taking names and called her into his office and scolded her for what she did. They can't expect her to support her little brother like this, so thus he arranged for an engagement to Ob Arnsbach, fulfilling Veronica's wishes, and dooming Georgine to a miserable life in the process. That was pretty much the last straw. She poisoned Sylvester at dinner, using the same exact type her mother used so often before, and for the first time, she was actually happy seeing him in pain. But as we know, Sylvester lived and Georgine was sent to Arnsbach. She briefly considered taking power there, but found zero interest in their politics. Her life amounted to so little, so why bother? That was until she realized she could stand above Sylvester as the first wife of Arnsbach. So she enacted her plan, and it actually worked for once. Too bad she still felt empty, and would, until she could finally take Ehrenfest and kill Sylvester. But that wasn't gonna happen, until she got her hands on those fateful letters from Bezewanst. With that, they arrive in Ehrenfest, where they use the schematics drawn by one of her namesworn from the recent Edtwinkle to navigate the sewers into the temple, right as third bell rings. I think the most nerve-wracking part of the epilogue is the bells chiming. That builds a lot of tension, but don't worry, we're still not done with this volume. I'm sure you're expecting me to launch into the side stories, but we actually have something different in store this volume. There's a large section that's not in the web novel that's exclusive to the actual light novels that contains the defense of Ehrenfest. At least the first half. This basically is what happened while Rosemine was in Arnsbach. First up is Geeb Kernberger in the activated country gate. Just before spring prayer, he gets a magic letter from Florencia saying to expect an attack. Well, they were already prepared for one, but they're on the opposite end of the duchy from Georgine. If anything, they're expecting to send knights as backup to the capital. So they ask Alexis if anything's gone down, but he's in the dark just as much as they are. Probably because he wasn't in the meeting we saw. But as he and his knights discuss what they should do with this information, another letter drops on his desk, this time from Sylvester, saying he and the Knights Order will teleport to his estate and open the border gate, and NiGiD doesn't have to do anything of note. Yeah, he says that, but the Ob is still visiting out of the blue. And what teleporter exactly? Do they have one? Suddenly his entire staff are tearing the estate apart looking for the magic circle, and luckily they find it in their training grounds. So they clear the way, and sure enough, later that night, Sylvester and the Knights Order appear. The Geeb is shocked by a few things, but keeps his noble facade up, like the teleportation itself, but also Rosemine and even Eustace and Eckhart, who should be in Arnsbach, right? So they race off to the border gate where Sylvester opens it, and what happens next causes a massive stir. Rosemine makes her Grutricite and fills the gate with mana. It's shining super bright, and the implications here are massive. His main concern is, are the royals actually okay with this? And Sylvester lets the Geeb in on their secret adoption plan, and shows him the courtship necklace from Sigiswald. After Rosemine leaves, the Geeb is left with the realization that there is no future where Rosemine returns to Ehrenfest, or becomes the Archduchess like he hoped. And what about Wilfried? Does he know? Because Alexis hasn't said shit about this. Yeah, while all of his knights are stoked about the country gate business, Geeb Kernberger is too focused on the future of the duchy, his son, and the country to even care. Next is Bridget, Ilgnar's battle. She's called to her brother's office while looking after her daughter who's about 1.5 years old. Cute detail here, she named her Lila Rose, showing how much she still looks up to Rosemine after all this time. But what's this meeting about? Florencia's letter. Everyone there is pretty confused as this information isn't really new, so why are they getting it now? I guess they'll need to increase their guard along the border, but that means pushing back the Arnsbach commoners who have been foraging in the mountains in Ehrenfest. They feel kinda bad, but they can't overlook them anymore. Volk even says it's the responsibility of Arnsbach's temple and Archduke to deal with them. It doesn't really fall to Ilgnar. Brutal. And that's when Rosemine sends her ordnance with much more details about what's gonna happen, and to gather intel from the commoners to report to the castle. Also look out for any silver cloth or weapons, and if shit goes down, contact Bonifatius, because he can get the Knights Order there right away. Okay, so this is much more urgent than Florencia made it sound. So Bridget takes up her role as a knight once again against her husband's wishes. But if there's a threat, she needs to protect her family and their daughter. So with that, they mobilize and alert their neighboring Geebs. And on patrol, they notice some brown patches and catch sight of some people stealing their land's mana, like we saw at the end of Rosemine's point of view. They go to chase them off, but turns out they had more knights in waiting, so they had to fall back. Bridget tells her brother when they're back at the estate, and they call Bonifatius expecting him to arrive in another day or so. But no, they get orders to clear their garden, and he'll teleport in at 5th bell. Wait, what? Sure enough, he does. And they can go on the offensive that same day. Bridget trained with Bonifatius, so they're on good terms. And while on patrol, they find more devastated land than when they left. Oh, and also the people invading. Bonifatius wastes no time in smashing past them to down some trees to block their escape route, with his mere name sending them into a scramble. Yeah, dude's apparently pretty famous. But soon enough they capture them, and that pretty much wraps it up. The issue is, you can tell that this is just a diversion, and soon enough, their neighbors call for help, and Bonifatius has to race off to protect them too. After he's gone though, they get a report about some suspicious people who left Leisgang heading for Ehrenfest 2 days ago. People on a boat who were clearly disguised nobles. So she sends an ordnance to Rosemine, but it refuses to fly. Suddenly Bridget is scared because we saw earlier, that usually means somebody died. So she tries to send one to Cornelius and Angelica, but those also don't fly. Fearing the worst, she contacts her ex Daniel, and he's strictly business despite her losing her damn mind. He informs her that Rosemine is just in Arensbach on a mission, and they'll keep an eye out on this boat from Leisgang. Yeah, things have changed a lot since she left her service, but Bridget still prays for Rosemine's success in Arensbach to protect their duchy. Next is Felina, just like our drills. In the castle, Felina and Gresha are struggling since they're getting cornered and drilled for intel by pretty much every noble there. Such is the life of a lay and med noble serving an Archduke candidate. Am I right? So they're late to their usual retainer meeting for Rosemine's people staying behind. Otillie and Bertilda offer to back them up so people leave them alone. Good. But they get an ordinance from Riarda telling them about the attacks in Ilgner, Griebel, and Gerlach, and also to be ready here in the city. They've gotten word from Clarissa that Rosemine is still passed out, and Ferdinand is heading for Ehrenfest with Dunkelfelger in tow. Oh, Charlotte is handling communication for the knights, Florencia stepped back from managing supplies, so Brunhilde took over, while Sylvester's staying with the Foundation non-stop. Why that's important is usually the first wife is the one who manages supplies, while Florencia has a more important job to handle with the impending invasion, one we'll hear about next volume. The topic shifts to Felina and Roderick, who confirm that the temple is functioning great, as they've essentially integrated with Melchior's retainers, so they're ready for the lockdown when they get word. But the planting company said through Gil that they wish for Rosemine's clothes to be evacuated with her personnel so they can keep working through the chaos. Sure, why not? Her retainers aren't going to refuse. Back at the temple, they're doing their usual paperwork when word finally comes from Daniel that Georgine's group is expected to arrive around noon, so they do still have some time to evacuate. Felina's frozen in place until one of Melchior's scholars gets her back on track, and they follow their routine. Judith goes to activate the combat shoe mills and stand guard herself, while Felina heads to the orphanage. There, she has everyone pile into the basements for safety until they hear word from her to leave. They head back to Roderick and Rosemine's chambers where they power a magic tool to protect her temple retainers and themselves. Now, this is probably designed with archnobles in mind, so it nearly drains both of them, and they have to tag team it with rejuvenation potions to get it to power on. But once it is, they're locked down tight, totally secure. Right as fourth bell rings. Next is Effa, strong bond, strong protection. Camille gets her moving to the Gilberta company from her job when word comes down to evacuate. Yeah, if you got your timeline down, this is like a few hours later and they're already set to move her clothes too. But when she arrives, Tully takes her to another room to get her changed into nicer clothes to visit the Noble's Quarter. This is going to be her first time seeing where Mine lives, so she's pretty excited. They pile into some carriages and go to Rosemine's library where she's shocked to see just how much space a single family can have here, to the point that she mistakes the side buildings as neighbors rather than still belonging to the same property. Inside, she's expecting to see Rosemine, but Losvam answers and explains she's not there. As a member of the Archducal family, she's leading knights into battle. Crazy, but Benno accepts it. As everyone piles inside, she can't help but worry. There will be a magic tool to protect them, but what about Gunther? He's gonna be at the West Gate where they're expecting things to go down. Thus, she asks Damiel to give the charms that Mine made her to Gunther, and Camille and Tully do so as well. Damiel's a bro and low-key the linchpin of the defense plan here, so he does just that. With some extra protection for her husband, Effa heads inside, where Ella goes to cook, Lutz and Camille study the furniture for research, and hey, they even get a chance to see her book room with Losfam's approval, and Effa gets pulled in to help Karina sew. She's not super confident her abilities are going to be up to snuff here, but this is pretty much a dream come true, to make clothes for her daughter once again. And thus, she finds a distraction from the stress and impending attack. And lastly, a promise fulfilled from Gunther's perspective. He's been knocked down to captain due to his impending move to the sovereignty, so he's back to dealing with the apprentice soldiers. And they've got a pretty nasty job to do, of stockpiling literal shit to throw at nobles breaking into the city. Yeah, the kids are bitching up a storm, and Gunther tells them to knock it off, since even if nobles are being more considerate these days, they could still piss off the wrong one and get killed as a result. After they're done, a knight has them go figure out when the ships from Leisgang usually start coming in, and as it turns out, it's about noon. So Gunther spreads word to be on the lookout for suspicious individuals coming from there. And come time, they're all paying really close attention when a name the audience would recognize comes up. Lago from Gerlach comes, and his story checks out. Because, you know, he's an actual merchant. So they let him pass as third bell rings, and the knights arrive to tell them to start the evacuation. Gunther springs in action, hitting up all of his assigned areas, before making his way over to Effa's workshop to find out they've already packed up for the day. Good. So he races back to the West Gate where Damiel wishes to see him. He pulls him aside and gives him the charms from his family, saying they're already safe, but they wanted him to have theirs for extra protection. Gunther asks about Rosemine and Daniel responds that she's defending the duchy as they speak, which makes Gunther remember her promise from when she first became a noble. So, he takes his post and sees some people with silver cloth approaching the gate. But they can't jump the gun here. They have to wait until they get close, not to ruin the element of surprise, since this could get pretty ugly otherwise. I mean, they are still nobles after all, and as fourth bell rings, Gunther's ready to protect the city and his family. Okay, I sorta lied. There is a side story, I guess. Just one. It's not as important to the overall narrative, but it gives a lot about Ferdinand's early life. Something that we haven't seen before in this story. We have Follow Your Heart from Ferdinand's perspective, right after Detlind left the Mana Replenishment Hall. Yeah, he's pissed that he even thought of Detlind as a noble, and not just some common whore, because that miscalculation's what led him to his current situation. He fantasizes about taking her into a back room and burning her stupid Veronica-esque face right off, but he can't move, obviously. And this means this must have been one hell of a poison if he's paralyzed despite his antitoxin, and Rosemine's magic circle's protecting him. He gets that Letizia was manipulated in all this, but he literally just got done telling her that Roswitha's disappearance was a scheme, and she still walked right into it. Yeah, he's disappointed. Even Wilfried got a punishment, however minor, for still entering the Ivory Tower. And this is obviously much worse than that. Letizia's death alone would be a best case scenario for punishment based on these crimes. Most likely her retainers and family are also going to be wrapped up in it too. This would undo Arnsbach entirely with the amount of heads that are about to roll, and she didn't consider that in the slightest when she acted. So, he deems her a failure. Thinking about that makes Ferdinand wonder if Eckhart and Eustace made it back to Ehrenfest, though he does know that won't help him. Mostly, he just wants them to be able to return home and live in peace and hopefully save Lasfam too, but he knows them all too well. Those two are going to come back for revenge. Great. Ferdinand thinks about all the people who would just be happy to hear about his death. Detlind, Georgine, the royals, probably all the sovereign nobles too, since they assumed he was trying to steal the throne through Rosemine. But he does know that Rosemine would probably mourn his death, even if Yverman ordered her to kill him to finish her book. Though hell, she'll probably be happy she didn't have to dirty her hands doing this. So I guess in a pretty morbid way, Ferdinand's death will save the country. His only real regret is that he couldn't warn Sylvester, meaning he failed in his promise to his father to protect Ehrenfest and Sylvester. So Ferdinand passes out, thinking about Veronica's harsh words calling him useless, since turns out he is. But when he wakes up, he realizes his name has been stolen, and the flow of mana has slowed drastically. Now the mana around him didn't cause him any pain like when he gave his name to his father. No, this one's familiar, because it's the same as the one from his charms. Yeah. Rosemine stole his name. That's when he hears the order through the namestone, and he calls her a fool for giving it. Now he is in pain because he's not accepting the order, but once he does, it goes away. It does make him somewhat relieved that she wants him to live, but for what purpose? That's when he passes out again. But this time, he remembers his birth mother who gave him the name Ferdinand told him to go find his own dream and live his own life. Now that concept felt foreign to him in the Adelgisa villa where he was just expected to die, but Ermhilda, the woman he moved to Ehrenfest with, gave him a pretty kind answer when he asked that he'll find a reason to live one day. She wished truly that Ferdinand would live and grow and one day meet someone very special. Ferdinand doesn't know who she wanted him to meet, but this is one of his most vivid memories from his childhood. As Ferdinand accepts he'll die without meeting whoever she wanted him to, he's awoken by a sudden flood of water. Looks like Detlind and her lackeys finally came to finish him off, right? Or not. Turns out it's Rosemine. I wonder if that memory was a literary device to kind of inform us something about their relationship, huh? As the exchange we saw plays out, we realize Ferdinand was really out of it and just barely holding himself up. But he keeps thinking about how beautiful Rosemine is. When it's clear Rosemine values him as much as her actual blood family, it finally clicks into place for Ferdinand that this is exactly what Ermhilda was talking about. Surely Vermin didn't count on them refusing to kill each other, and thus Ferdinand plots on how best to destroy Arnsbach while he recovers. So with that, we finally made it through all the side content this volume. And it was a lot. Between the first half of the battle for Ehrenfest and learning more about Ferdinand's past, this sets the stage in a different way than previous side stories have. But before I jump the gun and get into the Battle of Ehrenfest, and trust me, I know people would love that, but I just don't have time for it in this video, I've got to wrap this one up with my final thoughts. This volume kicked off the climax of the story in a big way, with Rosemine using her Gurtrasite and skills honed in the Royal Academy to blow everyone's expectations, and it's a fitting start for what's to come. As crazy as that sounds, stealing a foundation and closing a country gate are gonna be minor footnotes at the end of all this, but as for the end of the volume, they've essentially removed Arnsbach as a threat, and now all that's left is to take out Georgine and thwart whatever plan that Lind is working on in the Royal Academy. We find out this volume that Jürgenschmidt has been teetering on the brink for centuries at this point. The Civil War isn't the cause of these issues, despite how often it's brought up and cited as the main cause for Jürgenschmidt's problems. That was more the culmination of them. We're already dealing with a number of systemic failures in how the country was originally set up, due to small incremental changes over successive generations. The gods never told the first Zent how to organize the country, he just did it and set up a pretty robust system. The only problem is, and we did get a glimpse of that this book, was that he never foresaw that the nobles of his country would stop being so involved in the temple. And again, that was a slow process. We saw the Zent stop being as religious, with a warmongering Zent looking down on the wisdom of the gods and trashing other candidates who tried to circle the shrines. The temple fell out of favor as a result, and eventually the establishment of a royal family, with them leaving the Holy Land entirely. That all had a profound impact on the country's history and ability for it to govern itself. That becomes increasingly apparent in about Volume 11, but the fact that the Zent has forsaken the Holy Land and is looking down on religion is a huge issue when we know that the country is a magic circle for sealing part of a Weagleeb's power. Why is it doing that? Well, we'll get the answer in about a few more books, so look forward to that. In essence, this volume told us the real importance of religion and how the country moved away from it, but the real end goal will be getting them back on the right path. Speaking of that, there's an interesting bit of lore concerning Eisenreich and what we learned in Kernberger with the revelations this volume. Geeb Kernberger mentioned that Ob Eisenreich could have taken over the country and been Zent. But here's the real question. Did he mean the Ob had a Book of Mestianora himself, or that Eisenreich just had the military might to overthrow the sovereignty? It's kind of hard to say because that's the opinion of a Geeb 200 years after the fact, but Ferdinand says the magic tool is a relatively recent development in Jürgenschmidt's history. We know that Dunkelfelger had a king come from their duchy and there's centuries more history than Ehrenfest, with only 200 some, so more likely is that Eisenreich could have taken the sovereignty in a fight, but we probably would have been in a situation like the country is currently, a dead Zent and a missing Gurtrasite. The reason I say this is because we know his daughter was going to marry a prince and join the royal family. That means the royal family would have already been blocking other Zent candidates from getting a Book of Mestianora at this point, but would the magic tool have been in use? There was a gap there, and that's hard to say for sure. But based on what other nobles consider recent history, Eisenreich's downfall probably would have been around the same time the magic tool Gurtrasite was in use. I say that because if it was a Book of Mestianora, the Ob wouldn't have assumed he could claim it himself through conquest, unless people vastly misunderstood what the book was even back then. So either way, it just goes to show how many bullets Jürgenschmidt has dodged over the years. Not much to really say, but I did find it kind of funny that Ferdinand used Rosemine as a desk here. It's a good callback. She likened him to her bench, and she's his desk. And I'm not really gonna psychoanalyze that in detail, but since Ferdinand is so comfortable at work, but it is stressful, it shows how he views her in a similar light to how she views him. Someone she can be comfortable around, but is a massive source of anxiety in their lives. So I'd say it fits pretty well. The epilogue this volume really rounds out the whole conflict in Ehrenfest. Georgine has been a major antagonist since part 3, but all we ever knew was how others saw her. She was this mysterious, monolithic master strategist who is multiple steps ahead of everyone with webs of plans all playing out to accomplish her goals. That made her sound like this imposing force, but ultimately an enigma in this franchise. Everyone always remarked how disinterested and guarded she is, but after all this time, we finally got an idea of her personality, goals, and thoughts on the events in this series, and it's pretty damn illuminating, because it doesn't really change her character or make her sympathetic, but shows a lot of parallels to Ferdinand and tells us what motivates her to do these awful things. Veronica's abuse has only been directed at Ferdinand, Florencia, and the Lies gangs from our perspective until this book, because those people weren't her family. But what we see is how deeply narcissistic and abusive she was, perpetuating generational trauma that carried from her mother to her daughter, and even down to her granddaughters. Yes, both of them. The one she actually interacted with in Charlotte, and the one she didn't with Det Lind facing neglect and emotional unavailability. Georgine is the product of her mother's insecurities at being unable to produce a male heir, until she finally did, where everything Georgine had was taken away and given to her brother she viewed as weak, inferior, and soft. But her education puts her in a far more similar position to Ferdinand, where Veronica's abuse seems to breed exceptional individuals, but with almost no emotional growth, creating essentially psychopaths. Georgine is basically a pissed off child torching everything that wronged her, but with years to grow bitter over her situation. And that makes her such an interesting villain, as she's almost a one-to-one to Ferdinand, but without the support of Sylvester and Rosemind to advocate for her. And the thing is, one of Rosemind's major accomplishments is she broke Veronica's cycle of abuse throughout this story, by thwarting Georgine's plans, giving Ferdinand an emotional connection, and probably even preventing Charlotte from walking a similar path. And as prevalent as the theme of family and connection is in Bookworm, breaking generational trauma fits well into that narrative, showing both the good and bad of family bonds, and choosing how to connect with healthy ones. The single side story of this volume answers a lot about Ferdinand's past from the man himself, and solves quite a few mysteries here. It shows us just how little he values himself and how systemic that mindset is. It began even before he met Veronica, because he was a mere seed of Adelgisa, meaning he was only ever really treated as a face stone. Named Quinta, literally a number, because that's how women in the Adelgisa villa viewed their children. And don't go thinking they're monsters for that just yet, because we'll learn their lives weren't great either. Hell, Ferdinand already hinted about that back in Volume 6 when talking to Det Lind about accepting a princess into the villa. But going from that to Ermhilda showing him actual compassion and kindness, despite her not actually being used to dealing with children, actually gave Ferdinand a little dose of hope that Georgine seemed to lack. Granted, that was ripped away by Veronica in more ways than one, because when Ferdinand went to the castle to prepare for his baptism, Ermhilda disappeared. Massive air quotes there, because it's heavily implied that Veronica killed her. The reason being she was Adalbert's half-sister and due to be his second wife. And we know through Wilfried just how much Veronica opposed the idea of a second wife to secure her own status as the first. Since Ermhilda wasn't there to claim Ferdinand at his baptism, it let Veronica claim that he was the son of a mistress and publicly abuse him, as he didn't have a mother and thus another family for backing. So really, this side story highlights a lot not just about how Ferdinand views himself, but the key distinctions that make him different from somebody like Georgine, who underwent a similar upbringing at Veronica's hand. Honestly, if Georgine hadn't been so obsessively bitter, she probably could have sympathized with Ferdinand after he married into Arnsbach. And little details like that are what make this story so damn interesting. So that's it, we've made it to the end of this volume, and it's been a hell of a ride. Rosemind took Arnsbach's foundation and managed to save Ferdinand, but we also got a ton of lore about the country, and a real crazy look at the path ahead of us. Is Rosemind going to become Zent, stay Ob Arnsbach, or ascend even higher? Hard to say, but those are things we'll find out in the next few books. Because next time, we're going to start the defense of Ehrenfest proper. For now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with the link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Autumn Stott, JMunt33A, Pokeflute, Robin DBL, Samuel Chen, Sazi, Tristan, and Vonstrom for their continued support. Thanks for watching.